This module is relating to the work of Caroline Walker Bynum. As with all these modules, we're examining one perspective as a way of exploring a wider issue. This module explores the ways that religion engages with questions of the human person. 1. Embodiment. What it means to have a body, how society impacts our bodies, both individually, individual persons, and as a category of bodies, something which society impacts on a structural level, and the various meanings and categories that we might apply to our bodies. And 2, the issue of specificity versus universality. Whether our specific human bodies and the shapes and skin colors and hair and secondary sex characteristics which our individual bodies might have, whether they're just tied to our individual bodies, or if these specific characteristics have a wider, more universal meaning. So at some level, whether someone's the skin color of a body or the shape of a body or where you have hair or not have hair, if that specifically says something about the nature of humanness generally, or it's really just one person's body and what it looks like. Now, Walker Bynum used medieval writings and perspectives as a lens to explore wider themes of personhood and the human condition. Her work reminds us of the fatal flaws which lie underneath our perceptions of the existence of universal, timeless truths. They're not really universal or timeless and may not even be true. Her work reminds us of the importance of remembering that much of what we perceive will always be filtered through our own hermeneutic. Now, we've spoken about hermeneutic before in this class, but give it another opportunity for another definition. Hermeneutic is the lens through which we view the world. And that lens is impacted by our context, our place in society, our class, how much education we have, these sort of broader things, but also specifically where we are in time. Is it our hermeneutic could be shaped by whether we are older or younger, whether we potentially like where we see seasons change. So whether we're experiencing autumn at the moment or we're experiencing spring, and where we if the world might have some impact on that, and where we are in the world would have an impact on that. All of this impacts our hermeneutic. And the problem that we often find is that what we understand to be universal might really just be applying to our own specific individual understanding of the world, our own hermeneutic. And Walker Bynum kind of plays with that idea of, can you actually have something which is universal, which really only applies in some level to the specific. So when we read medieval texts and see ideas and concepts which seem to reflect back our own perspectives and assumptions about the time and what that time has to teach us, Walker Bynum reminds us that that's actually only our own hermeneutics coming through. And we actually need to read their texts as they would have viewed them. Hence, her insight that the medieval concept of a gender binary has far less to do with the specifics of bodies, shape, hair, secondary sex characteristics, and far more to do with gender as roles or categories. Thus, women could engage in masculine work and men in feminine work. As women were seen as more connected to the body because, well, they birthed children, and medieval understandings of the human person were influenced by a division between body and soul, where all of the aspects linked to soul would be deemed masculine. Dispassion, the afterlife, greater connection to the divine, timelessness, a sense of not being bound by earth visions of time, and logic, whereas body would be seen as feminine and all the elements connected to that: caregiving, nurturing, dealing with the current lived reality bound by time, in that bodies actually age and then eventually die and then decay, that they're specifically linked to something which can die versus the soul which cannot. This meant that medieval women could actually subversively claim a path to connection with the divine that men would not be able to claim as easily, and would lead them to engage in forms of spirituality that were specifically embodied. Now, this was the case because they were connected to a religion, Christianity, which places actually a significant amount of emphasis on the body, the pain, the death of a specific individual human person. So by emphasizing the aspects of spirituality which linked to Jesus's body and death and pain, in many ways, because women were already sort of shuffled off to the lesser sense of body, they could subversively, again, claim a greater connection, a greater spirituality to the divine through Christianity. And Walker Bynum sort of emphasizes that in her work, looking at medieval mystics and medieval women's spirituality. So what this week's module demonstrates is one example of how religion and religious ideas shapes people's sense of meaning, not only of themselves, but of their own bodies, and the ways that these meanings ripple out through society and culture, impacting the way people eat. And Bynum spends a lot of time talking about food and food culture and the importance of food and food culture on spirituality, how they work, and how they structure their societies. Now, we'll be looking at issues of gender and sexuality in the next few weeks. And all of this is a way of trying to get at these questions of how does religion shape not just issues of potentially larger import of terms of the divine, but specifically relates to our bodies, our lived experience, and the structures and societal structures that we sort of build around ourselves, and how they oftentimes reflect much more our own context and hermeneutic than they reflect something more timeless. So religion at some level is still a human way of engaging with issues of greater import. At some level, one could say religion is, the human's way of responding to the divine and trying to understand the connection with the divine. And Walker Bynum starts off our reflection on the human person for the next few weeks, that we're going to be looking at in this really interesting way.